Right. Good morning, members. It's gone 10:30 and welcome to the first Education and Learning Committee of 2020, in fact of the new decade. I hope you've all had a good restful break. I'm sure there won't be much hard work involved this year like previous years. Tracy, do we have any SEDERUNT apologies?
Thank you, Chairman. We've got 22 members present. I have apologies from Robert McQuiston. And just to provide an update to members, since the papers were published, there's been amendment to the membership, whereby Adam Wilson is no longer a member of the committee and Elaine Murray has now joined the committee. There was also an admin error where Sean Marshall appeared on the frontlist of your papers, but he's not a member of this committee and he was advised accordingly. Thank you.
Right. Do we have any declarations of interest?
Sorry, Chair. There's also apologies from Councillor Ian Cridders, and Councillor Tate is running late, but he is coming.
Thanks, Karen. So do we have any declarations of interest? No. Right. Can I just advise that I propose changing the order of business. I think after we've agreed the minute, we'll take items 4 and 5, and then Councillor Scobie sent out a request to all members that we take item 10, the review of school capacities, early on in the agenda. He received the mistaken notice of cancellation of the meeting and arranged a meeting with a constituent in Stranraer, so we need to be away early during that period. I'm a bit concerned because obviously I personally received about 3 or 4 minutes later a meeting an email reconvening the meeting. So can we just check to make sure that all members have received that, Tracy?
Yes, thanks, Chair. All members should have been issued with an amended invitation following the cancellation, which was done in error. But I will check upstairs and make sure that all future meetings of all members are included.
Thanks, Tracy. So that'll be items 3, 4, 5, and then 10. Okay, so if we move to the item 3, the minute of the meeting of 12th of November, can we agree the minute? Okay, agreed. Thank you. So if we move to item 4, counselling in schools. We have Mark and Linda to speak to it. This report provides members with details of a local project jointly led by DUMFRIES and GALLOWAY Educational Psychology and the Youth Inquiry Service for delivering on the Scottish Government's requirements for counselling services within schools. It provides details on current work within youth work and educational psychology to support the mental health of young people and identifies the current gap in our offer. So, Mark and Linda, is there anything you want to add?
Good morning. As a very brief introduction, we'd just like to focus on the collaborative nature of this project. This is our first project between educational psychology and youth work. It's attracted attention from other areas of Scotland because it's quite unusual in how people are taking forward the Counselling in Schools project. We're clear that the whole of this is greater than the sum of the parts, so although we're both bringing different things to the table, very quickly we've formed an implementation team that is jointly planning, taking things forward, and will jointly evaluate.
Thanks, Linda. I do think it's a very good paper, and in fact we're actually building on a Grow Your Own project, which we know which works in extending not only the duration but also the scope. I think it's very good. Members? Ivor?
Chair, I was reading through some of the case studies and I was slight concern here. A, do we have a predominant problem with our young ladies because there's 11 case studies that are female and 4 case studies that are male? Or do we have a problem in how we deliver the service that the males aren't coming forward to actually be or aren't getting the benefit out of this? The other thing was the wellbeing wheels. How accurate are they? Because up at the St Joe's the other night for a first year parents' evening, and standing with the youngest one. Oh, I don't like science, Dad. Absolutely hate it. And we get to the table, and the science teacher goes, "Do you like science, Archie?" "Oh, yes, yes, like science." Now, is it a case of when you do the initial one, they don't know what you're wanting, then when you do the next one, they do know what you're wanting, so they answer what they think you want to hear? Or are they actually getting that benefit?
Thanks, Councillor Hislop. In terms of the mix between male and females who are accessing the group, it's just under 50-50. In terms of the case studies, they were in terms of what we felt professionally were good examples of the range of work that was going on across all schools. So the case studies were picked in terms of getting a variety and mix to show members, as opposed to necessarily indicating that the project's working more predominantly with females than males. And in terms of the well-being, I think Linda's going to cover that.
Thank you. Yes, well noted with the well-being wheel, and you're absolutely right that people's perceptions change from time to time. We're like that ourselves. If somebody asks us at one point in the day how things are going, we might say great. At other times, because something else has happened, we might go, no, it's not great. And that's why we have to, moving forward, in terms of our evaluation of this project, we're having to use other measures as well. So there is an element of personal construct and self-report for how young people feel at any given time, but we need to be using other measures. We need to use the hard data in terms of attendance and attainment, but also reports from staff, school staff around them and their families, so that we get better triangulation of what appears to be going on. Because you're right, we could just hit it lucky one day and go, yeah, everything's great now.
Elaine?
Hi. Thanks, Chair. I picked up the same issue as Councillor Hislop in terms of the gender split. And I can see what you're saying, but I suppose what I really want reassurance on is that we know that suicide is one of the biggest causes of death of men of a certain age, and that young men are particularly reluctant to talk about their mental health. So I'm just wondering, how can we ensure that we are actually able to get to the young men that need assistance, because they're maybe less likely to come forward than young women are. So, how do we actually make sure that we're getting to the young men who need to be, to be assisted when there is that reluctance amongst young men to actually talk about their mental health?
Thanks, Councillor Murray. I think with this project, although what the paper that's coming in front of the members is called the Counselling in Schools project, I think what's important for the committee to know is that that's certainly not how it's being promoted within schools, because I think that if that was how it was promoted to young people, there's a potential there that particularly young men maybe would not come forward for the project. So within the school, in terms of what's promoted to the young people, it looks very different and feels very different. But at the same time, they have a clear understanding what support's there. And from that gives us the reassurance that in terms of males and females, that we're able to both target equally as much to both groups. And certainly the numbers accessed in terms of the gender breakdown, it reassures me, in terms of us targeting that. But again, it's something that we are doing a lot of work around specific promotion, if you like, when the youth workers are in the schools speaking at assemblies or at classes, it's potentially about how it's promoted and how it's done differently based on maybe what different genders require. But it's certainly something that we're acutely aware of and working at proactively.
So I've got Ros, followed by Willie, followed by Tracy, and then John, and then Jim.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this paper, and it's a really positive project, and I'm extremely excited about it. One thing that I thought about, though, was what happens when the children leave school, because if they're receiving a form of counselling at school, I'd be really worried about somebody leaving at 16 or 18 and not. So it's really about the project having a vision of continuing care.
Thank you. I think we have to remember that Counselling in Schools project is an early intervention project, so the level that we are pitching is before young people would be engaged with our local mental health services in terms of CAMS, clinical psychology, and so on. So we wouldn't be expecting that somebody that was only accessing counselling in schools would be leaving school with a significant mental health problem. If they did have that significant mental health problem, it would have already escalated to our health colleagues. Within the mental health, we've just formed a mental health in schools group. We have our first meeting on Monday, and that's a health, social work, education joint group. And we're developing pathways for young people that will include as they leave school. Thank you.
Willie?
Thank you, Chair. Likewise, I welcome this service and any service that will assist young kids, children at school and so forth, and counselling is required. I think it was Colin Smythe that had a report in the paper not so long ago where 1 in 4 children are actually suffer from poor mental health, which is really a big issue throughout our schools. If you take 1 in every 4, would be suffering from poor mental health. What concerns me in this one is I would hope this is a complementary service, but over the piece, since I've been in the council, then I've seen a reduction, if you like, in the child psychology service. And really, my question is this a complementary or is it a substitute? Particularly when we're seeing, and hope it doesn't happen, and I was at a meeting this week with other 3 members, where the parents made it clear that we don't want to see any reduction in the budget on additional support for learners. And this means also in teachers in that service as well, and not taken away and centralised in a hub. So my question is it a complementary service rather than a substitute for other provisions?
Thank you. The start of this project was a proposal by the Educational Psychology Service, which looked at the present mapping we have of services. We also linked in with the Mental Health Task Force for Scotland and the Association of Principal Educational Psychologists. So we used all of that information nationally and locally to look at what do we already have in place and what are our identified gaps. What we discovered was that our identified gap is young people who do not need medical intervention, but the school system feels that it is beyond their remit or comfort level to support the young people with the stage that they are. So we're talking about young people that are stuck, but staff in school don't feel that they're well enough equipped, that they need something else to be able to help these young people in an effort to prevent young people going on to have a mental health condition. So it's an early intervention project that we're working with staff at the universal level to build up things like better relationships and mental health first aid and so on. We've got the health services in place. This is to fill a gap, so it's not replacing any existing service or reducing any existing service.
Willie?
I'm not entirely sure that actually answers whether it's a substitute. I'm referring to the child psychologist or psychologists and the number that we had employed. If we're seeing a constant reduction in that, and also to our ASLs, teachers and learning support workers, that we're not trying to centralise in another place, and then this is a substitute rather than a complementary service.
Can I clarify? Do you mean educational psychology service? We've not reduced our service at all. We've kept the same capacity for the last 2 years, and the implementation officer that we've taken from educational psychology, we've backfilled to replace her duties with our service. So we haven't reduced at all to be able to do this.
Tracy?
Thank you, Chair. Well, my question was actually asked by Councillor Surtees and it was addressed, but I just want a little bit of extra assurance and clarity because you answered it very well. Am I right in thinking that if this is under the if this is a youth inquiry service and a youth work service, that when they leave school, when the young people leave school, they're still under the watchful eye of that service, and that goes to the age of 25 anyway, isn't it? So they would still be under the care.
Thanks, Councillor Little. I think you're absolutely spot on. I think that's one of the advantages of the collaboration here, that is that there's the opportunity, if a young person is being supported at school, that they would then be referred on to youth groups or work within whatever area or locality they live. And because the service does go up to 25, we certainly see that as something that would happen in terms of the young people then being referred on to some of the core provision that happens within youth inquiry service. And if it's appropriate to continue one-to-one support or group work within that, then there's the opportunity to get that within our community-based settings across every ward in the region.
I just find that really assuring, so that's great, thank you.
Thanks, Tracy. I've got John Young, Jim Dempster, Jim McComb, Andrew Giusti and Tommy Sloan. So, John?
Thank you, Chair. I think this is absolutely wonderful, and thank you very much for putting so much work into it, and I wish you all the best for it. A wee bit of clarification. I'm very pleased to see the online support at weekends and during school holidays. However, if a child makes use of that portal and the youth worker has concerns about what he or she has read about this child's situation, what rights does the youth worker to pass these concerns on to other parties, school or medical or parental issues?
Thank you, Councillor Young. In terms of the online support, it would be the same with any of the support the young people are getting within schools, that if there was a safeguarding issue where we felt that the child's well-being and was at risk, then that would be referred on to the appropriate agency. If that's at the weekend with the online support within Dumfries and Galloway now with the new multi-agency safeguarding hub that exists, then there is already existing arrangements in place where that can be escalated if it's required, very much if the child is in immediate danger. And then it would be also using the existing mechanisms that we already have if it's something where the young person's not in immediate danger, but it would be appropriate to pass that information on to other places. But at the same time, we need to balance that with the need that a one-to-one counselling support service needs to be confidential, and that's one of the aspects that will make it work for the young people.
Jim Dempsey.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I have an observation and a question. Reading through all these, the Narrow Senior Schools that are covered here, there's never in one of them, by any of the children that were counselled, mention of substance or alcohol misuse. And I think that is an issue, and whether that's dealt with somewhere else in a different environment, I don't know. That's just an observation. My question is, there seems to be a huge disparity between the drop-in sessions and the individuals that attend at all the varying schools. And I'd be interested to know why that was, because I would have thought there'd been a similarity in scale and in support needs, especially when you see the preface to it, where it tells you how many people are in support needs, how many people are in poverty, etc., etc. So I'm quite surprised there's such a disparity in the numbers of people attending these sessions, and I wonder if there's the reason for that.
Thanks, Councillor Dempster. In terms of the different elements that's within the pilot project, they were offered to schools in order that the school senior management team was then able to make a decision on what the appropriate input from the staff and the resource was within each school. So, and within that, the young people access the services, particularly one-to-one support, are done through a referral basis. So it will vary depending on what each school puts forward. But it may be that a school is taken up to use the majority of the time for one-to-one support, which obviously by the very nature of it will have lower numbers than if some of the schools have taken up maybe more of the group work programmes, such as Seasons for Growth. So if a school has got a specific issue around bereavement, maybe where a pupil has passed away, then the school has maybe opted to take up the group work support, which will have a larger number than another school that maybe doesn't have that issue, and then the staff time would be used for one-to-one support. So that's the reason for the difference, significant difference between each school, but it's tailored to the needs of that local school.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Chair.
Jim McComb.
Thanks, Chair. a very interesting report, but I'm concerned about the links you have with the Educational Psychology Service. Are there formal links with this service? Do you have regular meetings, or do you submit reports to the service?
Thank you. Well, as you're aware, on our implementation team for this project, I'm the principal educational psychologist, and my colleague from educational psychology is leading on the project day to day. So we're involved straight away at an implementation route, and we will keep that partnership going after the implementation period. I think you're asking me about, like, at a casework level for an individual young person. The way that we are looking to support young people through this project is through the child's planning process. So it's not an additional add-on that nobody really knows about, and there's conversations taking place that aren't feeding into the wider child's plan. So part of our process in the next few months is bringing this project into the child's planning process, using the same processes, protocols, paperwork, so that it's a joined up plan that whoever's partners to the plan, be it educational psychology, social work, or whoever, are all singing from the same sheet. They've all got the same understanding, and they're all aiming in the same direction.
So, is the information actually written down as opposed to simply conversations?
I think Mark was highlighting here the issue between information sharing and confidentiality. What we're seeking to do in this project is to be able to share themes from individual sessions, but also agreeing with young people about what we think needs to get shared with the wider partners to the plan, so that, and helping young people understand what that's about. It's not about trying to tell everybody their business, it's about everybody being able to plan together. So it's that balance.
Andrew? Thank you, Chair. I think my question was kind of touched on by Jim Dibston. My question was related to, I'm looking at Stranraer right now, Stranraer Academy, and I see the likes of the support sessions. It's 36 sessions, but 7 individuals. But that's in a school of 929. And then I look at the likes of Langham Academy, which is a school roll of 247, where there's been 73 individual sessions and 9 individual young people. The numbers to me would assume that Stranraer Academy and the other big schools such as Langham and such would all have much greater numbers than what they actually do.
Thanks, Councillor. Just in terms of, it's a very similar answer to what I gave to Councillor Dempster. The reassurance I give to members is that throughout the whole pilot project, every secondary school in the region got the exact same staffing resource to be able to do it, and it was up to the school senior management team how they chose to use that resource based on the need within the school, and what was delivered within Stranraer Academy was based on the discussions and the need that was within that school at that time, but it may change as the project goes on.
Do you think that there was an inequality in the service then overall in bigger schools?
I think one of the things that was important with this was that there was an equity of provision across all secondary schools, and one of the things that we're doing with the model in terms of the rollout of the new project is to allow for some flexibility in that, so that if there was a lower level of demand within one school for time then, and there was an increased demand within another school, say Stranraer Academy, we had some flexibility to do that on a cluster level.
Because there is some that I also note on all the schools. The Stranraer Academy also has the lowest attendance rate out of all of them. So I'm wondering if this is due to bereavements or such, or something that a counsellor in the school could have actually helped with or something to get that up.
With regard to the attendance rate, that's one of the things that the Educational Psychology Service is looking at, and we've been, as you say, it's not equal across all schools, so we've started to use the data that we're getting back from schools to inform our allocations. So this year is the first year that we've actually given additional support to Stranraer Academy specifically because of the data that we took in last year.
Thanks, Chair. I'd just like to reiterate what my socialist colleague from Stranraer said and support the Youth Information Worker Service. I think any service that adds to what our children are learning or are needing is a must. But what I've also got to do is maybe, Wally Sauter raised it, we've got to challenge the wisdom of the SNP Scottish Government, and in some way of this council administration, in talking about cuts in learning support while we're increasing this service, which is commendable, and I would double it if they could. But why are we talking about cutting learning supports or the needs for learning support when we're increasing this? I don't see the wisdom in it at all.
I accept that, and I don't think we've agreed any cuts in additional support for learning this year. That was an option which was put forward. It hasn't been agreed. And we all know what the financial situation is, Tommy. None of us would like to make any cuts at all in education. Unfortunately, that's not the situation at the moment.
Can you confirm then, Chair, that I'm not going to touch the learning support?
I can't confirm anything at the moment. John?
Hello, Chair. Thank you for letting me back in. I note in the report that you will measure the impact and report to mental health in schools and health and wellbeing strategic group. It's a 3-year project. When will this committee receive information back from how it's progressing over its 3-year life?
As part of the project, we need to report to the government annually, and subject to agreement with the chair, that I would imagine that it would be appropriate to bring that annual report to this committee for approval before we submit that to the Scottish Government, which would give members the update in terms of how the project progresses over the next 3 years.
Yeah, no, I'm happy that we do that at a future meeting. So can we move to the recommendations? Can we note 2.1 and note 2.2? Okay, thank you. So Mark, you're leaving us now, are you? Linda's staying to be joined by Stephen Jewell. So this is the Care Experience Children and Young People Education, which starts on page 97. So Linda and Stephen, is there anything you want to add to the report? Okay. So members? Just as a way of background, I should have read this out at the start. This report provides members with information on Dumfries and Galloway's Care Experience Education team and the approaches from supporting learners to address the educational challenges that exist for looked after and care experienced children and young people. The report also seeks member agreement to receive further information on progress and impact at a future meeting. So, Ros?
Thank you, Jeff. Again, I welcome this project. It looks like it complements what we've just been talking about and links in, and it's very, very positive. But I'm wondering about the geographical spread of the team. How are they going to make sure that all the regions of our region are covered?
Thank you. What I would say is we have originally had a bit of difficulty recruiting in the west of the region. What I will say is, as of Monday, we have a new teacher starting who's going to be covering the clusters of Stranraer and Douglas Stewart High School. So the first sort of year of the project has been very difficult to cover those areas, and we have admittedly had to cover Nithsdale, Annandale and Eskdale and Stewartry primarily. But we've recognised that, we've addressed that, and we have a new member of staff about to start.
Okay. Oh, Willie?
Chair, it's just a question really, and I hope this does not impinge or impede on further service, because I've had a contact made by Homestart in Stranraer, and I again would imagine Homestart would complement this service. But it's part, I think there's been a notification given that there'll be a reduction in funding to Homestart, which is really quite concerning, because Homestart does deal with families and young kids, at a very early age of intervention in providing that social stability and support. Can again, to the question asked by Tommy, can we get an assurance that you know, similar projects like Homestart are not being affected by the budget? And you may say that we're not in the position to address that just now, Chair, but I really could do with your assurance that in the third sector, that we're not bringing in, you know, that we're complementing both services and not reducing from the people who need it most and within the strategy of our most vulnerable.
My answer to Tommy's last question still stands. These are options which have been put forward by officers. We haven't agreed or disagreed any of them. And we still don't know what the budget's going to be because of the delay in the budget. And I know in the run-up to the election it appeared that austerity had been a big mistake. It had been a big mistake. I totally agree with that. But we aren't in a position to confirm or deny anything.
But Chair, you know, I hear what you're saying and appreciate that you're not in a position, as any of us are in that position until we know what our settlement is. But where we've got services that are providing that support to vulnerable families, I would hope that you would at least give us some comfort and hope that we are not looking at these type of services both in the statutory and the third sector, because both complement each other, and it's more a direction, and I'll speak to, you know, others where you have given maybe a negative direction, but I would hope you would be giving a positive to the people who are providing these services.
Well, we are in the budget process, and I certainly look forward to seeing your group's budget proposals in due course.
I'll give you the new if you want, Chair.
Okay.
Because there's no cuts.
And how are you going to fund that?
We'll fund it by an increase in using maybe reserves, Chair. But I'll bring that forward when the time is right. Maybe you would like to show us yours now, please.
It's a tempting offer, Willie. The reserves total 6.8 million, and I think the budget deficit this year is something in the region of 15
We're discussing the budget now, Chair.
You started it. Okay, moving on.
I'm quite happy to have the debate if you want.
Moving on.
Thanks, Chair. In 3.7, there is reference to 2 pilot projects. That was in the previous financial year. Can I ask what has happened to these 2 projects? Why did they no longer appear?
Thank you, yeah. So the 2 pilot projects that were funded in the first year of the project, which I have to say was a part year, the funding wasn't a full year's funding. We funded 2 FTE employability workers for a period of 5 months, and we also offered some of our learning assistants in school the opportunity to undertake additional hours to work within Hardthorne Road Children's Home to support homework in there. The whole purpose of these pilot projects was also to build the capacity that was already there. We knew that they were pilots, so the likelihood of us being able to continue them indefinitely was limited, was unlikely. So what we did during that period of time was the employability service was supported in terms of the way that looked after young people are worked with. But in terms of Hardthorne Road in particular, the staff that we put in there also worked really closely with the care staff within the home to make sure that young people who were living there, who were coming home with homework, there was a bit of an understanding as to how the care staff could support that long term. So it was designed as a sort of, I guess, as a sort of chance to put extra capacity in to build the existing capacity that was there. But the main focus of this project has always been from the start additional teachers to work with young people in schools, young people that we identify through data that school gives us. So really these 2 pilot projects were, I guess, a bit of a bonus in year 1 to allow us to build the capacity of what was already there. I hope that answers that.
So really what you're saying is that capacity building has taken place and that additional input is no longer required. Is that correct?
I think, as I say, what we had focused this funding primarily on, and the vast majority of the funding is going into, is additional teachers, which the project is designed to raise attainment in literacy, numeracy and health and wellbeing. So my view very strongly is that you raise attainment through teacher input. Teachers are what give us that. So really what we were saying was we recognised there were other areas that we could assist with and we could help with. And because we didn't have a full complement of funding and the full teaching staff in place in year one, we were able to use some of that funding to build the capacity elsewhere.
John?
Thank you, Chair. Another very exciting 3-year project. I'm sure it will go very well. To raise attainment in literacy, numeracy and well-being, it must be very difficult. You can set a baseline for measuring literacy and numeracy, but how do you measure well-being? And if I can ask another question, Chair, how difficult is it to keep track of care experienced children once they leave school and perhaps move out of the region?
Thank you. The health and well-being, I think we're back to the same thing that I said before in terms of there's no one single measure that allows us to know everything's okay or everything's not okay. So we're ensuring that there's data around a child in terms of the views of other people, their attendance at school, their engagement with whatever the next steps are and so on. So it's not just limited to one measure, i.e. not just a self-report. Sorry, can you repeat the other part of your question?
No, I mean, obviously care experienced children, the council's involved them up to the age of 26. Now, during that time, some of these young persons will move out of the region, and also some care experienced young people will move into the region. How are these children monitored and assisted when they move out or into this region?
In terms of education, from an education perspective, which is what I can mainly speak on, we can track and monitor young people through their transitions into wherever they're going next. The Educational Psychology Service offer a consultancy service to do that. In terms of the outcomes, the more multi-agency outcomes for young people, the corporate parenting group has plans in place for tracking and ensuring that we've got that continuity of tracking and monitoring, and that's done through the Leaving Care team primarily.
So can we move to the recommendations? Can we note 2.1, note 2.2, and agree 2.3 to receive a further report in summer 2020, outline progress and possible impact of the project, as well as future plans? Okay, right, thanks. So if we can now move to item 10, the review of school capacities. That's on page 157. This report asks members to agree the updated capacities for all primary and secondary schools in the region and updates members with connections to the school models transformation work. Parents of children moving into P1 and S1 will be enrolling children in schools over the coming weeks. Once agreed, these capacities will be shared on the Dumfries and Galloway Council website to assist parents in making decisions on where to enrol their child. And we have Lauren and Gillian to speak to the paper. Is there anything you want to add? Members? Kenny?
Thanks, Chair. Just wanted a quick query, please, just about, obviously some of the numbers have changed quite significantly in terms of capacity. Some of the numbers I've seen, DLT, obviously I'm part of that, and one of the schools has gone up by 40% in terms of their capacity. Did we know that there was going to be such a big swing before we redid this process again, Lauren? And how confident are we in those numbers now versus last year? We were making quite significant decisions last year based on schools that were full and are now got hundreds of spaces, like sort of on paper kind of thing. Now, just a wee bit on that, please, if you wouldn't mind.
You're right, there are quite a number of schools that have seen a significant change in their values right across the board, not just within DLT or Dumfries itself. I think just to take a little bit back to when the process of determining capacity was established in 2009, all of the schools actually haven't seen a revised capacity brought forward to committee. So part of this process was to address that. So in some situations, if you take Annan, for example, just because it's at the top of the list, since 2009, Annan has had a performing arts centre added to the school and a few other alterations. So there's quite a number of schools that have gone through that position. So we needed to capture that to show a revised capacity there. I also think there have been quite a number of minor alterations, refurbishments happened across other schools that have seen a variance in the value. But my sense is that in reality, the original numbers may have had some errors in them. I don't know because I wasn't involved in that piece of work. But what I can say is what we've done is we've looked at the process of determining the capacity, which basically looks at every floor plan for every school, says how many practical rooms, how many non-practical rooms do you have, add that up, take 80% of that value, and that gives us the numbers that we've got. What it won't do is it won't look at anything that was involved in any capping process or any other decisions around what that number should look like. What it does is it provides a benchmark base measurement that's had the same process applied across every school to give us a bottom line number. And that number is fair and consistent across the estate.
Thanks for that. Has there been any feedback from head teachers as to these numbers and what their thoughts are on that?
There's been a couple. I thought actually, honestly, because of the level of change that we see across the board, there'd be a whole lot more. Kirkcudbright, for example, was one of the schools that queried the value in there. I've been down to meet with the head teacher, school support manager and the local elected members yesterday, and we have agreed that their original value of 613, I think it was, is short. Some of the changes there are things like the trades workshop was added, the community centre is now part of the school's footprint. There's always that little bit of debate over, is it a classroom, isn't it a classroom? And I think where a school has capacity and a room that isn't being utilised, it may well be called a six-year common room or a video conference room or a meeting space. But the reality is, if that was required for children, it would revert back to a classroom. I think part of this process is also trying to provide value for money in terms of physical investment in the school estate. We could have a position where a school has quite rightly changed the name on the door to say it's used for something else, and then when a housing development comes along or an increase in role, the question is, actually now we're not big enough. So that's where we've gone back to these original numbers. Now, if that situation ever arose, I think we always would go back to that individual situation and evaluate where the best place to go is with that. I think also what we'll see is it would be sensible for us to continue to bring these values back to committee as we do with the primary capacities on an annual basis. I think as we move forward through the transformation process across the estate, what we need to come up with is a set of rules, almost an accommodation schedule for a size of a school to say a school of 600, inside there should be a meeting room, there should be a video conference room, there should be a community space, there should be, and then measure the footprint that we have against that, and that will come through the transformation process and revise these numbers yet again, I would think.
Thanks for that. And just one more, if I may, if that's okay. Just looking at the cold figures, without taking anything else into consideration, what are the kind of implications here? Because we have got a huge number of schools that are sitting at around 50% capacity. What's really going to happen there to address that?
Pardon me. Thank you, Chair. The transformation programme needed this baseline data to move on some of the key questions that Lauren's alluded to. What are the criteria for our school estate that we can agree with stakeholders before we make any further decisions? And we'll clearly keep teaching staff and school managers aware of that as important stakeholders in that process.
Thanks, Chair. There are a couple of primary schools which are currently over capacity. What mitigation is in place to address this issue?
We see this maybe 2 or 3 times every year where there's a school that's under a particular piece of pressure for their physical capacity. Generally, the way round about that is to provide a team teaching solution inside those schools. So physically, a room, for example, might be big enough to take 37 children, but the GTC registration restricts that to 25, 30 or 33. However, if an additional teacher is put into that space, we can go beyond that number. So in these situations, that's the case where that's happened across those schools. It's always difficult in these positions because we have schools that are more popular in terms of extraterritorial placing requests. When that happens, the children or the family have the right to remain in that school all the way through it, but sometimes you have then catchment children coming up through that put pressure on that school itself. So rather than refuse a placement for a catchment child, it's generally better to try and find a solution for that, and then hopefully over the course of the next couple of years there will be less extraterritorial placing requests into that school, and the percentage of utilisation will come back down.
Elaine?
Right, thanks. I have some concerns around these, particularly the secondary school capacities. I just wonder, who determines the formula for which these are calculated? I mean, if you had a look, for example, at St Joseph College, which has recently been refurbished, it now seems to have a capacity of over 1,000. That's 35% higher than the school roll, and I can't actually see how you'd get that extra 267 kids into that school. Now, other than that, there are consequences from those figures as well, because you would not be able to refuse placing requests, so you could have a consequence for the other schools in Dumfries, for example, because you could get 267 kids transferring to St Joe's from the other schools within the borough, and also has consequences for planning, because if we have high numbers for the school capacity, then we aren't able to ask for contributions, developer contributions for housing development that's going on in those areas. So I'm just wondering, where do these figures come from? Who determines that, and what sort of consultation has there been as to whether or not these figures are correct?
In terms of the policy on how the numbers are calculated, that's a Dumfries and Galloway policy that was brought to this committee in 2009. So that remains unchanged. Effectively, it counts practical classrooms, non-practical classrooms, and calculates the number up. What we've done is we've taken that process to St Joe's to arrive at the 1,032. Now, the original number of 765 was based on it was based on the number of pupils at the school when the Phase 1 Dumfries Learning Town came to be. Now, that formed the bid to the Scottish Government. So to give a bit of clarity on that, how the Scottish Government and the Schools for the Future programme works is it looked at how many children were at the school at that point in time, and it said if you were between 400 and 800 children, it was 12 metres squared per child, and then they said it was £2,500 per metre squared. So that gave you a pot of money that you could use to refurbish the school. Now that didn't define how big the box should be or how small it should be. What's happened through the design process, though, is there's been, I don't have the data in front of me, but in terms of, there's 15 practical rooms and 15 non-practical, and when you do the maths on our current policy, that derives that revised number that's in there. I think what is interesting is the number, the value for the pot to refurbish St Joseph's can be cut and carved in different ways. So if you look at a general purpose classroom compared to a practical classroom is generally 1.5 times the cost. So if you reduce the number of those spaces within the school, you can fit in more of the non-practical. So it's how that's evolved through the design process has actually determined the capacity of the school, and that's where that revised number comes from.
You're saying that the policy in terms of capacity is ours, it's not come from the Scottish Government. So, I mean, I would suggest we should be looking at our policy again, because apart from another consequence of this, if it looks as if we are so under capacity, we will have problems in getting money from the Scottish Government for renovations, because they'll be saying you'll have to reduce the size of your school.
That's within our gift to look at what sits within that policy. I would say that comparing that to other local authorities across Scotland, we are we are on par with everywhere else. In fact, there are some local authorities that work to 85% efficiency. We're 80, which seems to be the average. I think where the challenges come in with these numbers, and Kenny will maybe support on this one, in that when you're timetabling spaces within a school, all of this is worked out on each class having either 20 or 30 children within that space. What we see with the depth and breadth of curriculum that we offer is there are quite a lot of senior aged classes which will have a lot smaller numbers in them than that. So even though we have maybe a 6-year class which has 10 children in it, that room theoretically, if it's a non-practical, is counted as having 30 in it. And that's where the reduction of 80% comes in to allow for that timetabling flexibility. However, I know there are challenges in smaller schools where numbers are smaller, so senior phase classes are smaller again. However, I mean, it is within this committee's gift to ask for that process to be reviewed and looked at.
Ivan?
So, my understanding of this, we were asked to look at St Joseph's, because that's the one that's been mentioned. And when we were refurbishing St Joseph's, we refurbished it for 765. I thought it was 750 because we were reducing. So what you're telling me, we've spent more money on that than we should have done because, well, it's actually 1,000 kids we've refurbished it for. So we've wasted money on doing 300 spaces that we didn't need to refurbish. Is that what you're saying? Because that's what this makes out.
St Joseph's is slightly different because it was a refurbishment. The existing envelope was there already. What's happened is that the floor plate within the school was completely cleared, and then that internal space was divided up into classroom spaces. So it's not so much that it's been made too big, it's just that that's what the existing space has allowed us to create within that physical building. There was a level of reduction in the school in the newer build part that juts out onto the playing area. That was removed. But because it's a listed building, there's constraints on how much you could actually physically remove from there. I think had there been an opportunity to downsize it, that might have happened. It's a different case with new builds because you're starting with a fresh box at that point.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a couple of questions about primary school capacities, because you've talked about, I wasn't aware of the formula that was used in 2009 to calculate them out. But looking at my own school, I'm in Gatehouse. It says we've got a capacity of 191 pupils. Now, obviously, we've had placing requests that were denied because we couldn't employ additional staff. And that's impacted on these figures in here, because in theory we could have been sitting with more pupils had the placing requests been allowed. And I also wondered how you got to 191, because I've tried lots and lots of different ways of calculating it out, bearing in mind that we're capped at 25 in a primary 1, if it's a straight 1. We're capped at 30 for primary 2 and 3. Composite classes are capped at 25, and straight classes at 33. And I've tried to kind of figure out, how did you calculate, what rooms have you used? And I can't for the life of me do it. I'm just wondering how you got to that figure of 191.
If we take the question from the teaching representatives in two parts, clearly I understand that schools and the school communities want as many resources as they can from a teaching staff perspective, but schools are designed for their communities, and we have to manage the resources accordingly. So when you have placing requests that come extraterritorially, if it costs the council additional money to put an additional teacher in, whether you have the physical capacity or not, then that placing request it would be refused in the first instance, and then parents would have the opportunity to take that to the panel, as is an annual process. So we design our schools to be fit for purpose for their own communities, for the size of their communities, and we manage our resources around that. And in terms of the size of the schools, really, certainly we will work with all head teachers and the teaching unions to make sure folk are aware of the process that's used. But for the purposes of today, Lauren, do you want to talk about Gatehouse?
Yes, well, primary capacity is calculated in a different manner. We've adopted the Scottish Government guidance on that. That came out in 2014. We adopted it in 2015. It effectively says a primary school between 1 and 8 classrooms should have one general purpose space. So in Gatehouse, there are quite a number of rooms which probably are marked down as a library or a general purpose room that actually we have to count as a classroom space. But I'm happy to go through the floor plan with you and just explain how that calculation's worked out specifically for Gatehouse.
Thank you.
Willie?
Thank you, Chair. I was pleased to hear Gillian mention stakeholders and just the communities, because I've referred to earlier, the 4 local members in Ward 1 met with the parents and parent councils and staff of Ward 1 only this Monday, and there was huge concern around the publication of this document relating back to the percentages, and I think there are 5 in the RINS part of Wigtonshire that has been identified being less than 50%. So, you know, a cynic would almost come to the conclusion that it was deliberate, the publication of this just before the budget, and that's no a criticism of staff and the production of this report, to give some indication that, you know, the move is towards closing schools, because you know, this is based on percentage, but the review that currently exists in policy is a primary school that falls to 19 and below triggers a review, but this seems to give the indication that we're moving in some other direction, and Kenny started to touch on it. And really it's a question of you, Chair, because in a news bulletin only last week, you finished by saying, you say change is inevitable. Could you tell us what you meant by that, or what you do mean by change is inevitable? Because the people out there, particularly in the parents that we met in the 5 schools in the RINS, are concerned that, you know, closure is imminent, almost. And we well know, and Elaine referred to the Scottish Government, and I hope they don't even attempt to stop the refurbishment. But when Glen Trill was closed, and I think it was less than 9 then, it had to be reopened because we didn't go through the proper consultation. So consultation will be a huge issue in terms of stakeholders and the community, and it will take a long, long time. So, you know, the timing of this, I think, maybe has been deliberate in terms of the fear factor, but maybe you could answer what you mean by change is inevitable.
I mean, we all know what the demographics of Dumfries and Galloway region is. We've got an ageing population, the number of young people is falling within the region as well. And a lot of these schools are there because of historic populations. And the populations change, and what we need to do is to look at the quality of education which we're delivering from these schools. And we're not alone in this. I know an awful lot of rural authorities are having to have the same analysis of the provision of education within their regions. And indeed, the Children and Young People Board at COSLA have agreed to set up a working party looking at small schools and how we advance our policy towards them. And yes, it will be a long process because we can't just close them on economic grounds. We have to do it on the educational grounds for that. So it is a long process, and we do have to get it right.
So, Chair, would you give the people then, you know, that are fearful that the document was that, you know, they're going to see closure, that you're not considering any closure at this point in time or in the near future?
We aren't considering any closure in the near future, but it's a process which we need to go through in order to look at the viability of schools and the quality of education. That's paramount, the quality of education which children receive. Merely because they go to a small school doesn't mean they get infinitely better. And what we have to look at, Willie, is parity in terms of the amount of resources we put into education. Okay, small schools may be thought about as being very good for the child or good for the area, but they are very, very expensive compared to larger schools. And I've got parents come to me whose children, for example, attend larger primary schools in Dumfries, for example. And what they're saying is, how can we put in so much more resources into these very small schools compared to what my child's getting at the end of the day? So it is about parity as well.
Could I welcome your statement there in terms of what you mean by inevitability, in that we're not looking at closure, because there is a fear out there within the parents. And I take what you say in terms of schools and capacity investment, because there is one in the Rins at Laswalt, for instance, that does require a great deal. It's an old school, but it's sitting at a high capacity. But it does require to the toilets of to be upgraded. It does require investment, and I would hope that is shortly coming for Laswalt. But also, I'm pleased to hear you and welcome your statement that we're not looking at closures.
In terms of that, really, item 9, the property buildings asset class update. I think I did a rough calculation, and I think something like 52% of the investment over the next 3 years is going to schools which have got less than 50 pupils in that. So that, I think it works out around about 1,250 pupils or something. So the remaining 48% of our pupils, which is 18,000 pupils, are getting 48% of the investment in that. So that's what I mean by parity. I'm sure it is, Willie. Ivor?
Thank you, Chair, for letting me back in. It's to do with the transformation news, and we're being asked to note the actions to be presented to Finance as in 3.7, which says the work package for the school models will be considered. Quite sort of to the point, rather than giving us a wee bit of information of what that work package is. But in Appendix 3, the key messages from the workshop events, the things that we can do quickly to transform school models. Then you have the first bullet point, which is to agree principles. But then the next bullet point, we recognise this would take time. So how can we do it quickly if it will take time?
Jim?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as both Councillor Scobie and the Chair highlighted, decisions such as these do take time, but we hope that one of the quick wins would be the agreement of the criteria. And that was the outcome from the transformation event. So the transformation event agreed that we needed to change, we needed to take decisions about the school estate to ensure it was of a size and scale that met communities' needs for the future. And the first step was to work with a broad range of stakeholders to establish the set of criteria that Lauren referred to, and that work has already started, and that work will be brought forward to Finance, Procurement and Transformation Committee at its next meeting or the following meeting, depending on the agenda. But it's certainly coming forward to Finance, Procurement and Transformation in due course, and that work's been done.
So is it the criteria are coming to the finance, or is it just the work that's behind the criteria? And will it be here that we to actually set the criteria that we as a committee will actually go forward with?
My apologies, it's the work package and the planning and the timescales for that work that's coming forward to Finance, Procurement and Transformation team, along with all 9 projects.
What I call Tommy, and I think a good idea, and I've spoken to Derek about this, is if we have a member seminar, this is obviously very complex and it's bringing up the whole range of issues. So with the agreement of the committee, I think we should hold a member seminar looking at the capacity issues, the policy with regard to this and other issues which have been raised in the course of the meeting. I don't think we're going to thrash everything out during the debate this morning, so could we arrange that?
That's a very appropriate course of action, and something that I think is crucial with this is that we do take stakeholders with us, Chair, and all members, I'm sure, want to also have confidence that we can validate the information before you, given the significance of it, given the feedback we've had. So that's certainly something we can incorporate into a member seminar and get that organised fairly swiftly.
Tommy, then Julie.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just hopeful that when we do sit down to thrash this out about the criteria, firstly, that this 50% nonsense doesn't become a criteria for closure. but that if we do sit down to thrash this out, it's at a public meeting, not a seminar, where the public can also have their say.
In the first instance, I think we'll have a member seminar. Julie?
Thank you, Chair. My question was about your members' seminar, and it was to ask if we could have union representation at that to represent the teachers.
Well, you are members of this committee as teacher reps, so you will be invited along to it. So can we move to the recommendations? I mean, in view of the concerns which have been expressed this morning, can I suggest we make some changes to the recommendations? In 2.1 and 2.2, rather than agreeing, we note the updated capacities and agree that officers will work with head teachers to confirm the numbers which are in the report. Well, we need to make sure we've got these numbers right. Members happy with that? Yeah. Can we agree 2.3? Note 2.4, note 2.5, and the additional recommendation about the members' seminar. And could we arrange that as soon as possible?
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, members? So if we can revert back to item 6, that's the early learning and childcare planning, which is on page 103. So the paper provides an update on local developments on early learning and childcare expansion to provide 1,140 hours of funded early learning and childcare for 3 and 4-year-olds and eligible 2-year-olds by the year 2021. The report details the procurement process for becoming a funded provider to deliver early learning and childcare through the Flexible Framework Agreement, which opened on Public Contract Scotland on 8th of November 2019. The deadline for submission was 16th of December 2019, and officers are currently evaluating the tenders against the minimum requirements and evidence submitted for the 10 criteria set out in the national standard. Contracts will be awarded prior to enrolment in February this year. The report details progress with the parental consultation to ascertain the views of existing and future parents and carers on the provision of early learning and childcare. The deadline for submission was 16th of December, and we have Lauren and Rosie to speak to this. Is there anything you want to add to the paper? No? Okay, members? Willie?
Yeah, Chair, and again, I welcome the report, and I have raised issues with Lauren on the provision in Stranraer in particular. And just before Colin departed, I had met with him and posed a number of questions in terms of the provision, but also in terms of whether parents are receiving their complement of the 1140 hours per week, and whether the structure in Stranraer not only facilitates that, but is reasonable and feasible for them to do so. So rather than spend time going over all those questions here, Chair, I would like just that I do it out with here with Lauren at a meeting so that I can get a number of these questions answered in terms of the provision in Stranraer, rather than debate the whole issue here today.
Yeah, I agree. That's better raised outside the meeting, unless you want to.
Yeah, no, that's perfectly fine. I think what would be sensible potentially, though, would be to wait until the next level of enrolment has taken place, because that's about to happen in February. So then we would have the next cohort coming through, and that'll give us at least current data to look at, if that's acceptable.
Okay, that would seem sensible. Julie?
Thank you. It was really a question around the procurement process. I'm aware that we no longer have Early Years Scotland membership for lots of people across the authority, and I believe the Scottish Childminding Association are also working at a reduced capacity within the authority. So what support have we been able to offer people who want to enter into procurement with us to ensure that we've got continuity of care, so if children are using a mixed provision, that's still going to be accessible to them when 1140 comes in August?
Thank you for your question, Julie. What I can say is that we have been really pleased with the responses to the tender process. We have had 87 tenders altogether, and that's 41 from the private and voluntary sector and 46 from local childminders. So that's very encouraging, and obviously we're evaluating those at the moment. For obviously it is a more formal process than the providers have had to undertake previously, and we recognise that. So where tenders have come in and we have required additional information, we have gone back to request that and to explain what we're looking for. So there has been opportunities through the tender evaluation process, which is still ongoing, for providers to submit further evidence so that we can give them the opportunity to provide what we need to appropriately evaluate that. In terms of, so we feel that we will absolutely have that breadth of provision going forward across the whole sector. So that would be local authority providers, the private voluntary sector, and also childminders. Your second point about a blended approach and support for the provision, we have just appointed 2 additional principal teachers to the earlier support team. So the central team has expanded, and we offer support across all providers, and that includes childminders. And some of that support obviously is around how providers will communicate with each other when a child has a split place.
Similar sort of lines, but it's maybe a bit too early to say. Are we confident we will have enough capacity within the 87 tenders to deliver the 1140 hours with regard to the points in 3.5 and 3.6 where they might not meet care inspector criteria just now, but they're working towards it? Are we sure that we will be able to actually have the capacity in place that meets the required standards?
Thank you for your question. Yes, on first looking at the tender documents, one of the first things we've done is to look at the care inspectorate grades, because they're obviously a key driver within the national standard. There are a handful of tenders that are not meeting the standard. However, we are able to contract existing and potential future providers, providing that we feel as a council that they can give us the assurance that they have the capacity to improve. So when they enter into an improvement period and will receive a probationary contract, should we decide to contract them, they will also get support from the earlier support team to help them to progress their grades and improve them before the next inspection.
Jim?
Thanks, Chair. The evaluation and assessment of tenders takes up quite a bit of staff time. Did we receive funding from the Scottish Government to cover that additional staff time?
I think within the bid to the Scottish Government for all things 1140, there was additional revenue funding that was at the discretion for each local authority to use however they wished. So within that, the team that's funded through the 1140 funding, that's the team that's been doing the evaluation process. Where we've pulled in additional resource from finance colleagues or procurement colleagues, there's been allocations within the 1140 funding to cover that additionality. So it's been fully covered through.
Although it's not covered in the report, a question was asked about by a member who isn't on this committee about the amount of capital funding which has gone to the partner providers. And I see that's covered in item 9. Almost 25% of the capital's actually gone to the private providers, nearly £700,000 out of 2.8 million, which is very good. Okay, members, can we move to the recommendation? Can we note 2.1 and 2.2? Okay. So this is a follow-up paper to one which came to the committee in November 2019. Members agreed that committee that officers review the capacity of Gretna Primary School to take account of the projected role of the school, agreed to receive a further report on the outcome of the review and bring options to members, A summary analysis was produced by officers informed by community conversation and discussions with the community council meeting, which provide a range of potential options. These are set out in the report. We have Lauren and Gillian to speak to. Is there anything you want to add? I think this is basically the start of the process, and this will be an ongoing issue. So, Karen, you want to speak?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, it's good to see this report in front of us. However, I think that at this moment in time, doing any options is premature, because obviously there's a lot of work to be done. So I know that in 2.2 it's saying about working alongside elected members, but I think it's important also to work with key stakeholders. So one of the options may be that we would remove the early years. So what consultation has been taking place with the likes of the PVI sector? Has any of that taken place so far to see what their capacity is, to see if there's any upgrades that they need? You know, we're talking like just a few months away, really, to see if there is an overflow. Have they got the provision to take that up?
At this moment in time, because none of these houses have been built and developed and it hasn't brought forward any new children, the capacity within the area for ELC certainly is covered through the local authority and through the partner providers. I think that's an important question moving forward, though, as the housing develops, brings more nursery-age children to the area. There have been discussions, albeit limited, with sparklers within the area to talk about their capacity and their future potential capacity. However, I think one thing that is important to take cognizance of in this discussion around the ELC part would be what are parents looking for, because what we've found through the consultation is that sometimes they're looking for a local authority setting, and I think that's the process we would need to go through, rather than just purely looking at it on a physical spaces perspective. We would need to consult with the nursery-aged parents to see what their preference would be and what that split might mean across the board. The previous paper mentioned that consultation exercise has been taking place, so hopefully there'll be some evidence in that that suggests potentially what the split would be, rather than just purely going towards a partner provision within that particular geographical area.
So that's where I think that it's so important that them conversations start now. I mean, I know that Councillor Tate and myself have met with sparklers, so we have, just to see what their provision is, and could they actually take some extra children in. But obviously, for planning for the future, if they are expected to take more children, then they've obviously got to make sure that their facilities are up to standard. They're not going to make that investment if there's no consultation or no discussion. Going back to the houses, there's 60 houses almost complete. A further 60 houses, so 50 houses allocated, 60 plus nearly complete, another phase of 39 going forward. We've met with private developers who is another 200 plus houses, and that outline planning's been sought, so they're going in for detailed planning. It is happening. There's developers' contribution coming from that. So this goes way beyond education, and this is one of the reasons that I had actually asked for a paper to come to the area committee to then see what directorates, because it's across the directorates. It's across, you've got health. We've got to know the knock-on effect that it's going to have with the health. So we need real in-depth discussions. It isn't just about looking at it in its own silo and thinking, okay, we'll remove early learning. Where are the kids going to go? What consultation's been done with parents? Or we'll build an extra bit onto the school. We've got to understand what's needed, the knock-on effect this is going to have, the contributions that's going to come in, and actually we want a long-term sustainable solution, not something that we've got to look at in the next year, 2 years, 3 years. So there's a lot of work to be done, and we're keen as elected members to obviously, and Councillor Dryburgh, who's not on this committee, I've spoke to him, he's keen as well, that we sit round the table and have some sort of working group, or at least realise that we're having, what key stakeholders to actually have consultation with.
As you say, it extends well beyond education. I think it's probably something which the area committee could address in terms of any working groups we wish to set up. Gillian?
Yes, certainly. Having spoken with the area committee on a number of occasions, it's getting the balance between the functions of service committee and any financial investment that might be required, and the governance advice as to what can be covered by area committee. And we felt it was prudent to bring these options to Education and Learning Committee to give members of committee sight as to the thought process, but clearly Service Committee would have to then take account of the role of Economy and Resources Committee, Finance, Procurement, Transformation, as well as the Area Committee. So we felt that this was within our sphere of influence, recognising that there's a much broader picture. And I wrote to ward members prior to Christmas, and be happy to sit down with you about how. I'll double check that invitation went out, but I'm certainly happy to sit down and talk with ward members about what part Education and Learning can play to any working group.
So, Chair, can we make sure that at least the area committee is consulted? I mean, I know it says in here that, it was consulted. I don't know what the outcome of that. Unfortunately, I wasn't at the last area committee meeting. It's saying that, there was discussions taking place, but I don't see within here what the comments that came from that. And it's the same with the community conversations. I'm very aware that options went to the community council. I don't know what the feedback is from that. And I've spoke to community council, and they're equally keen to work on some sort of working group. So I would like some guarantee as to...
Sorry, absolutely. The discussion at Area Committee, I can reassure you, was around the governance elements of it, about what items should come to Area Committee and what items should come. And it was a request for clarity as to the role of Area Committee and an ask that their views continue to be consulted and through what mechanism. So there was no detailed consideration of the individual outcomes, but I would hope we could start to unpick some of that quite quickly. I can assure members that the practical work around this is being done in the background. We are looking at some of the options so that when we get an opportunity to report, we've done that background work.
Derek, you want to...
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, members. No, I think there's clearly a lot of work going on in the background through colleagues in education, which is most welcomed. I think the clear sentiment is that this is a wider whole system implications and opportunity, both in terms of economic growth as well as the wider growth of the Gretna community. So I think the spirit of the discussion today is that you want to be assured that as a council we're looking at this in the whole with partners and communities and appropriate stakeholders. I think the spirit of that is what we'll take away from today, and we can then clarify whether indeed it's something we wish to take to Area Committee or indeed it's something we should, more appropriate to do at a ward level, and there that's something that we can easily do, and coming back to the appropriate committees for their particular considerations. But the key message really I want to reassure members today is that we are looking at this in the holistic context, that it will have implications and opportunities across whole systems beyond the council. We need to do that in an open and inclusive manner along the lines that some of the members have already expressed this morning.
Sorry, Chair, thank you for letting me back in. Yeah, I appreciate that, Derek. But it is about the keeping it up to date as well, because, we heard nothing and then we'd got information back that it went to community council, however, it had never come in front of ourselves. So it's about keeping that, and I want to know, who you're discussing with, because it's so important that we get this right, and, obviously I feel really passionate about it. We do need a long-term solution that's sustainable, so I think it's important that them conversations really start happening, we're kept in the loop.
Through you, Chair, fully agree with that, and therefore what we'll commit to is ensuring that we agree a regular period of time for a communication to be issued to the appropriate stakeholders, and particularly the ward members. So happy to do that on a council corporate basis.
And perhaps we could build that into the recommendations as well, just so it's formalised. Okay, Jim?
Thanks. Just in the back of what Derek said there, I've been reading 3.7, and I wouldn't want us to start breaking this region up into sections again. The review of the developer contribution arrangement should be a region-wide thing. If we're carrying out a piece of work to establish what needs to be done in Annandale and Eskdale, I fully support that, but the same thing should be done in the other three areas to make sure that this education authority is as well informed as it could be on the demands, needs and opportunities right across the region. I accept that there's an issue here and that's why the paper before us, but this is a region-wide committee and we should be dealing with this on a region-wide basis.
I don't think there's any problem with that, Jim. Okay, members, if we move to the recommendations. We've obviously considered the long list of options for Gretna Primary School, set out in paragraph 3.6. And can we agree that further work is undertaken? And also that there are regular updates provided on progress. Okay? That's 2.3. Right, so item 8, Head of Service 6-month assessment, April 2019 to 30th September 2019. This report provides members, it starts on page 111, this report provides members with Head of Service 6-month performance report. While much pupil assessment information is only collected and reported annually, this half-year report shows good progress across a wide range of indicators and projects to provide additional information. The report also includes a summary of outcomes of local inspections and progress against national expectations. And we have Gillian and Sheila.
Colleague Sheila. As you highlighted, Chair, much of the education information comes out once a year, so there are some gaps within this, but we can certainly update members. The local government benchmarking framework will be available in February, so as soon as that information is published nationally, we could provide further information to members in whichever format you choose.
Members? Either?
Chair, it's 3.9.3, the various school inspections. Could you remind me what satisfactory, good, very good means? 'Cause my recollection was that satisfactory is it's all right, but there are some serious weaknesses. That's me paraphrasing from the old reports. I don't know if they've changed the wording of that, but that's what it used to say. So satisfactory, in my terms, from reading what it said, would usually be unsatisfactory, because if there's serious weaknesses that need improved, I would think that's not satisfactory.
It's the inspections are graded on a six-point scale, and satisfactory is, whilst it identifies that there are areas for improvement, it is deemed to be a successful inspection. It will give us aspects for improvement, and we would be working very closely with the school to make sure those improvements are made. A satisfactory inspection also means that there will not be a follow-through. There will not be a follow-through by Education Scotland, but they would be expecting us to report back to parents and to provide Education Scotland on that the improvements that have been noted.
Jim?
Yeah, thanks. So that was the first point I would want to make. The point that I ever raised is the fact that satisfactory should be the baseline for us, and we should be looking to work with the schools to improve that, because it's encouraging for parents and indeed teachers and staff to know that the school is performing well, and that's where the good and very good, I think, should be what we aspire to. The other thing is a complaint, and I've raised this before, on page 138, we talk about failure to meet statutory duty and meeting the pupil and other stakeholder expectations. The head teacher at Killerholm School recently gave notice and left, and it took a member of the public to tell me that and ask me what we were doing about it. There's been a temporary appointment. I've no idea who that person is, and I think it's unacceptable, and I've raised this before, it's happened before, that members, elected members, are not kept abreast of important changes. I don't care if there's a cleaner leaving or if somebody's off sick for a week, but when there's significant changes, I think it's important that elected members know, because the public expect us to know. And this has happened before to me in my ward, and I genuinely don't want it to happen to me. And there are other elected members, I suppose, will have the same feelings if it happens in a school near where they live.
I'm sorry that was the case, Councillor, because I absolutely agree. We had a resignation from a head teacher. You should have been informed of that, and the acting head teacher arrangements immediately. Clearly, you would be invited to be part of the recruitment process, but you should have been informed immediately we received that resignation, and I'm sorry that was not the case.
And just to come back, Chair, the new arrangements are, there's been an interview and a person has been appointed. I wasn't asked, but that's part of the new arrangements. I'm not asked. I'll be asked to attend the appointment panel, I would hope, when the appointment is advertised, and hopefully there will be successful, or there will be applicants that will be suitable for the post. But no, I do expect to be kept informed when changes are made, and I'm disappointed that I haven't.
Jill, will make sure that's rectified. Sheila.
A comment.
Can I also just go back to your original comment about good and very good? Part of our raising attainment strategy within education and learning is that we would be aiming for all our schools to have inspection outcomes of good or better. So that is part of our strategy.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's what I hope for.
Elaine?
Just a couple of questions about the exception reports. The first of the exception reports is on exclusion rates for looked after children. I just wonder how many looked after children do we have in the region, because this is being presented as per 1,000 pupils. But obviously if we have only a small number, a small variation will be exacerbated as you multiply it up to the 1,000 people. So I just wondered what the actual figure for the numbers of looked after children were. And my second point really is the annual performance development review. Now, there are continual exception reports. I mean, you used to get them all the time at policy and resources. There really does seem to be a problem about people undertaking annual performance development reviews, and just what is being done to address that. And is it actually that people don't want to do them, and that there's a reluctance actually to get involved in doing these, and that people actually feel threatened by them, or because we just don't seem to be, as a council, get on top of this at all.
In terms of your first question, I looked at this in more detail yesterday, and the absolute number escapes me, but it's around 400. I think it was 420 the last time I looked. It's around 400. It's higher than many comparator authorities, but the number is reducing. So that does give us an indication. Normally I would bring, and I'll make sure that at area committee we try to report this in terms of individual pupils, because I think it is easier to understand if it is 1 or 2 pupils on 3 or 4 occasions, because that's what these numbers tend to actually reflect. Although the rate is the normal way of reporting this nationally, it's quite nice to see it in terms of actual pupil numbers. In terms of the performance review, this is a perennial issue. Again, apologies to members for bringing this back to you. I'm determined that this way of reporting will continue to be the focus, because it's looking as if our numbers, our percentage is dropping, when in practice that appears not to be the case. I certainly have no concerns from teaching staff, from support staff, from the teaching or non-teaching unions that these performance reviews are not happening, and there's certainly no mood music that people don't want them or are not happy to conduct them. But clearly the reporting mechanism is not coming through. So I've asked the team for a specific action plan to improve this for the next reporting committee.
It's a couple of questions on the sort of appendices. In the recommendations, we're asked to review the 6-month performance with regard to health and safety. Now, where will we go? Page 134. Communication arrangements for H&S implemented. Annual target 24, half-term target 12, no information. And that's quite evident all the way through most of the ones in there. And it's nice to note that we've had no violent incidents, we've had no accidents, so your health and safety must be really good if we've had none of those in the first 6 months of your report. Another one was following on from the leader. 61% of our staff have had a performance review. What percentage of our staff are teaching staff who, it says here, are required to record their annual performance review with the GTC? And if they don't record a performance PRD, what does that mean? Does it mean that they are then they lose their registration? And if so, how many teachers do we have working in this authority who haven't met that criteria?
I take the health and safety question separately first. We have struggled to report on some of the health and safety data, and I do accept that that's not acceptable to you. We will improve on that in the next report. In 3.10, we've set out in the report that we will bring a future report highlighting the 35 indicators that are currently being disaggregated from SIPL. So it is a piece of work. It's a piece of work that we've done with some urgency, and I can bring that to you as quickly as possible. In terms of the 61%, we know around 60% of our overall total workforce are teachers, and 40% on average are non-teachers. From that 60%, all GTC registered teachers are required to put their PRD on GTC. They're supposed to keep their professional review up to date, and as part of their professional registration, that is scrutinised on a 5-yearly basis. And if any member of staff has not met the GTC requirements on that 5-yearly basis, they run the risk of being deregistered. We work closely with any teacher who has not fulfilled the expectations of GTC. We are alerted to anyone 6 months in advance of that timescale being finalised. So if there's any teacher who runs the risk of being re-registered, we know about them, and clearly they cannot work in our schools if they lose the professional registration.
Thank you, Chair. There's so much in this report that's positive and good, and we're actually not very good at telling people how well our children are doing. For instance, on page 114, paragraph 3.9.5, there's about half a dozen statistics in there that could be illustrated with a line graph showing increases in attainment, positive leaver destinations. And I know a lot of the information comes in a much more fully developed form to area committees, but really this report to the Education Committee should really be much more positive of what our senior children are actually achieving, and we should be illustrating that a lot better.
Thank you, members. And I'm pleased to see that we recognise that improvement. Year on year, we have improvement on curriculum for excellence levels and throughout the senior phase. The attainment of our children continues to be strong and improving, and the poverty-related attainment gap is closing. We know that from the evidence that we have from the team. And if there are ways that we can publicise that good outcome, then I'm happy to do it through any forum that you feel is appropriate, because it is a really positive story, and our schools do a good job in our communities.
Ross?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Actually, it's almost the same as Councillor Hislop's question, because the PDR it's not just about recording it. And as a previous social work manager, it's about informing the head teacher about what the trends are, what it is that we need to do to help develop and support our teachers. And it is really important that we look at the wider picture. As you know, it's not just about recording it and knowing they're being done. They couldn't be more important. And as a manager, I had no idea unless I got the PDRs and got the reports and the statistics what the team needed. So it's really just a reflection on what I've said.
Councillor McKee?
Any care experience, that includes all care experience children, and I'm looking behind me as anybody's got a more definitive definition here. Sorry, Gwen. Sorry, Chair, but you're better getting it directly from the horse's mouth.
Okay, the report encompasses all looked after children, of which I think Gillian mentioned there's between 350 and 400 pupils. Variance across all the regions. There may be some schools with just no pupils or 1 or 2 pupils. So that's how sometimes the statistics look really, really exaggerated sometimes. But when we look at the numbers in real terms, those children are all looked after, kinship care, what was other criteria? Foster, all those ones. So they would be away from home, yep. At home is young people who are being looked after in their own home, but they're under the care of the authority. Other care experienced pupils that we're starting to look at now are those pupils who have been previously looked after, but are no longer on the system. and they are also care experienced, so that is maybe something in the future we should be starting to look at.
I think that would be worthwhile. Just from our point of view, and you just don't know what's happening. The reason they were there before, why have they disappeared, sort of thing. Thank you, though. That's fine. Thanks very much.
Julie?
Thank you. It was a question to do with page 137, and it was the failure of systems and processes which support pupils in the management of change in schools, particularly ICT. I've been informed this week of a breakdown of ICT in one of our secondary schools, which is linked to primary, and I believe they've had to cancel a prelim because of an ICT failure, and I'm just wondering what's being done to address that.
Sheila's just highlighted that a server went down in Dalbeattie. The situations do arise. Our business continuity arrangements are that would have to come up as quickly as possible. We've repeated, and it has been replaced.
Okay, so if we move to the recommendations, I think we've 2.1 reviewed the 6-monthly summary performance, and 2.2 agree with scrutinise the exception reporting. Members happy with that? So if we move on to item 9, which is the property building schools asset class update. The paper provides members with an overview of the financial position at the end of September last year and highlights projects with a significant financial change, either due to movement across financial years or a variance to actual project costs. The paper also seeks members' decision on declaring surplus the former Carling Walk Outdoor Education Centre and the Pavilion block at St Joseph's College. And as usual, members, if you want to discuss particular schools, can you do that out with the meeting with the officers? Nothing about Sanka, James? Members?
I refuse to mention Sanka today so far. I just want sort of clarification. The indicative budgets for 2021 means that what will commence on all of these projects within that financial year. Is that right?
Currently, obviously we work to a 3-year programme. Those projects are in there. That's the budget that is available at this point in time, and they're the projects that will go ahead, unless there's a change to priority order through committee decisions, or there's a change to the budget thresholds.
I think the priority order means Sanka first, aye.
Can we note 2.1? Can we agree to declare the surplus of former Carlingworth Outdoor Education Centre? And 2.3, can we agree to declare surplus of former Pavilion block at St Joseph's College as detailed at 3.6? Okay. So, moving on to item 11. This was an additional paper. Trust members have all had copies of this and a chance to read it. This is Dumfries Learning Town update. This paper provides an update on the decisions of Education and Learning Committee on 12th of November, where it was agreed that officers progress actions towards a programme of delivery for Dumfries Learning Town Phase 2. And we have Paul McCulloch and Gillian to speak. Is there anything you want to add to it? Nope. So, members? Julie?
Thank you. I would just like to say on behalf of the primary staff, the relocation of Lordburn Primary School is very welcomed.
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot of progress in this paper, and I think I was speaking to the Chief Exec the other day, and I think meetings have been arranged with officials at the Scottish Government to look at funding, and I think there's 2 streams going forward with regard to that, so we are making progress. I think we're making good progress. Okay. Elaine?
I say, with respect to 3.5 Noble Hill Primary School, I note that there is a new condition survey. There is some concern, I know, about the capacity of the school, particularly with the amount of new build that's going on in the Summer Park estate. And I just wondered, whether, well, for assurance that the issues around capacity and future capacity will be addressed in respect of looking at Noble Hill Primary School, and whether there's other arrangements have to be made there in order to be able to ensure that we have capacity there, whether that's under consideration.
Clearly, Leader, it's important to me to bring the capacities to this committee as well as the Dumfries Learning Town paper to this committee, because there's clear connectivity between planning our estate for the future and the maintenance of our asset class and the capacities in line of the expectations of Dumfries Learning Town. So we have to look at this in the round, and yes, I assure you we'll take account of the future role in that work.
I've got no one else indicating they want to speak, so can we move to the recommendations? Can we note 2.1? Can we agree 2.2? Agree 2.3? Agree 2.4? Agree 2.5? Sorry, note 2.5. Note 2.6 and note 2.7. Thank you, members. I've got no further business, so I think it's lunchtime.